This is a special edition of Ancient News. We will be telling the entertaining story of the fall of the Roman Empire. We have your hosts, Eric Baskerville and John Kwama, and Eugene Botway in the house. Hopefully, Esu will join us, and maybe Bennett will be here. I was hoping Bennett would be here at the beginning, mostly because he knows the early history, and so we could just review that real quick with him, but we don't know. It's not necessary. All right. Are you guys ready to go on this adventure?
Yeah.
Oh, why can't I hear you, John?
Oh shit! I forgot my.
You can't hear me?
My coffee.
The year was 300.
B&H, how can I help you?
B&H is here. From our homes to yours.
Okay.
As your
You guys there?
Yep.
Yo.
I turned your audio down for a second. All right, I got a slideshow here that I made. Okay.
I'm gonna mute myself too.
And let's see here. Also, there's some stuff here. You want to start? Yeah, with this guy. All right. So back to the slideshow. Let's see here. Yeah, these controls are in the way.
The fall of Rome.
Okay. All right. So this is usually a huge discussion and has been like kind of a legendary topic among historians. I mean, pretty much what our idea of the West is kind of like the parts of Rome that developed into Europe. So yeah, it's sort of a big deal. The other thing is that America is also a lot like the Roman Empire in some aspects, but we'll get to some of that stuff later. So this is just going to be like a quick 5-minute story. All right. So first, the state of the empire in the fourth century. So like the classical image that we have of the Romans, like from the Republic era, like that movie shit doesn't exist. It's a little bit different. First of all, the power center is not in Rome anymore. It's there's a bunch of emperors that come from the eastern side of the empire. So if I just go back to this map real quick, yeah. So if you look at this map right here, right, the eastern side of the empire is like everything on this dark brown territory, right? So you're basically talking about Greece and Turkey and Egypt and Palestine and, you know, the Black Sea area. So, right, not Rome, but Constantinople, because after Constantine puts this here, all the emperors end up coming from like this area right here. So they weren't coming from Rome, they were coming from here. So that's what's different. Then the Republic's a distant memory. There's already been emperors for like 4 centuries. So nobody remembers the Republic anymore except for like the people that like Romans that study their history and read a lot. Christianity's gone from a niche cult to a state religion. Okay, so Constantine makes it legal.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
Just to clarify for our viewers, the land that is to the west of Istanbul or Constantinople is Turkey. Just so they know.
Yeah. So like back in the day before Turkey, right? This was called Anatolia. And you know, all shit was fucking different. Borders were fucking different, you know, that sort of thing. So right, like this map right here, where the lines here, where it shows the size of the empire. This is like the largest extent of the empire under Trajan, which is like considered like the golden age of Rome. You know what I mean? Like you're talking about basically, if you think about Gladiator, right? Like that's kind of the height of the empire. Marcus Aurelius is considered the last good emperor, right? And he was dope, right? He was a dope fucking dude. Like wrote a bunch of philosophy, ran the empire, shit was tight. There were still invasions and stuff, but like they just got defeated, you know. So anyway, so like after the story of Gladiator, right? The empire plunges into this thing called the crisis of the 3rd century, where basically there's a shit ton of emperors and military leaders that each like become emperor and then they fucking get killed. And this lasts for like a good century. This happens like 100 years of just like motherfuckers coming in. There's one year where there's 4 emperors in 1 year. So that would basically be like if the president of the United States just got killed every business quarter and somebody new came in. You know what
Eugene just
Could you
blew a
fucking
load.
imagine that?
Eugene
right?
just popped a boner over there.
Every business quarter.
Every
That'd be
business
beautiful.
quarter. There's a new
That would be
president.
amazing.
Who
Imagine
murdered
if
the
That wouldn't be
presidents had the
amazing. That would be
fear,
fucking
fear in
madness.
their heart like
Bro,
that.
that type of effort, bro, that amount of effort, nigga, they deserve it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the president, and also the president murdered the previous president, right? Like,
You know what I'm saying? That type of shit. Like, bro, like I just imagine like Andrew Jackson like get into a full out brawl. Like,
Every
right?
day.
So, like,
White House.
you know, I kind
Andrew
of
Jackson would find out who was gonna kill him and then
You know
kill
what I'm
them, their whole family, everybody in town, a guy who looks like him,
you know what I'm saying?
and an alligator just
Beat
cuz.
their ass.
right. So, I mean, we all know the Roman Empire, right? It's like they have the legions, their military society, Caesar, you know, all that stuff. You know, friends, Romans, countrymen, Mark Antony, Cleopatra, you know, all that stuff, right? So the crisis of the 3rd century happens, and like you just get a bunch of there's a strong tendency for military leaders because they never solved the problem of succession of emperors, right? Like there was no law that was like, this is how emperors are made. It usually just depended on whether the fucking military supported you or not. And you
Right.
always, every emperor, when he became emperor, also provided a big fat bonus. It was basically like the military got like the emperor's signing bonus, right? So it would be like if the American president, when he became president, he was obligated to pay everyone in the military to ensure their loyalty. Okay, so it's like he would give the military a bonus. So after the crisis of the 3rd century, you get Diocletian, and he reforms the empire. And this is what happens. This is when you get the in-between period between what's considered ancient Rome and the Middle Ages, right? This starts with Diocletian because he brings reforms to the empire, but he sows the seeds of its fall as well, because he makes changes to make it survive, but some of them are like short-term good, long-term bad, right? So he tries to solve the transfer of power issue by designing the Tetrarchy, which means that the empire's so big, he splits it into 4 provinces, right? And then he makes, it's basically like, instead of having Caesar, you have 2 Caesars. And then under the 2 Caesars, there's like minor Caesars that like are the people that are going to succeed those guys. So he solves the problem of succession. The problem is that one of the fucking tetrarchs was fucking Constantine's dad. So once Constantine became a tetrarch, he just basically went to war with the other 3 and defeated them, and then he became Constantine the Great. So that didn't work, right?
Not only them, wasn't also like a bunch of like barbarians and shit too.
Oh,
Like,
don't
up
trust
in the-
me.
In the Germanic
We get
tribes
to
and
the
north.
barbarians, dog. The barbarians are a big fucking part of this story.
Yeah,
You know what I
word.
mean? Like, trust me, we're gonna be talking about some Goths. You know, and I'm not talking about like people that listen to The Cure. I'm talking about like
Talk about
the
big
real.
titty goth chicks.
Oh God, yeah.
Okay, so what he does is that the government for the Rome during the Republic in the early, what they call the Principate period, which is like the old emperors that were good, like Marcus Aurelius. Like Marcus Aurelius was the emperor, but nobody called him an emperor. He was called princeps, which means first among equals. So it's like he's basically primary citizen, but it was kind of like slightly communistic in the sense the society wasn't like that, but in the sense that like he was considered a public servant, right? But Diocletian does away with that shit. He's like, no, I'm the motherfucking emperor. I'm a living god. I'm gonna be like the kings in Mesopotamia and shit. And he's like, I am divine. So
Man, that's another one. That's
right,
another
so
one. We're not gonna
absolute
go back
power
that
for
far.
absolute power
Look,
for
I'm
the
telling you, there's a lot of things that I could say right now. There there are a ton of quotes that I can think of right now. Like, I mean, like Winston Churchill, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, if you have 10,000 regulations and you destroy all respect for the law type shit, like, like Plato, like one of the penalties of refusing to like participate in politics that you end up being governed, like you end up being governed by your inferiors. Like this is, yeah.
yeah. So
I can see that we're on the philosophical train here.
oh, most definitely. And we're going to have there's a lot about American politics to do too, but let me just get through this real quickly. So he tries to reform the economy, right? Because the problem is every time someone became emperor, from like Caesar all the way to Diocletian, the first thing they did was give out bonuses to the army and give out a bunch of free bread to like the people in the empire. So he tries to form the economy. He institutes laws and price controls, but nobody fucking follows them. And there's like a huge black market because there's hyperinflation due to the currency being devalued, right? So he has to put these price controls in. So the other thing that he does is he makes people inherit occupations and they can't fucking move, right? So if your dad's a tailor, you're gonna be a fucking tailor, right? So the seeds of feudalism that would come in the Middle Ages were sown under his policy reforms, right? The military gets reformed, right? So there's a lot more cavalry. Like since Constantine, they adopted like military tactics from the East. Standards are a little looser. There's more use of auxiliaries and foederati, which foederati is basically like peoples that are allied with the Roman Empire, right? So like auxiliaries are like auxiliary units in military. So like instead of like let's just say they outsource their military, right? So the way that we use Blackwater, that's what they were doing. They would just get tribesmen to form whole units. Now, back in the day during the Republic, these people would be trained by the Romans and be integrated into Roman society. But in the late empire, that didn't happen anymore, right? So that's an important point to get across, right? So the integration aspects of the military, right? They do it en masse instead of individually. Right. So then you also get urban flight, beginnings of manorialism. People are bound to the land. Absolute power for the emperor. He imitated the kings of Babylon and shit, and he made people bow in front of him. So that was a big deal because that didn't really happen in the West before. Okay.
To quote John Kwame and John F. Kennedy, let us not look for the Democratic answer or the Republican answer, but let's look for the right answer.
Okay, so here's where that's all the setup for the story. That's what's going on with the empire. Now we start the story. So first we're going to start with the Battle of Frigidus, which is basically like there's rival emperors that are running around and they're battling to see who's going to become emperor, right? So all the players for this story are at this battle. First, you got Theodosius II. He's the last emperor to rule both sides of the empire. He's also
damn, they had Theos that since back then. Shit.
Yeah, he was the last one. He was the last one though.
The first Theo. of all time.
Theo, go
So-
clean your room.
The Theo.
Theo, go get
No.
the pudding out the freezer.
No,
Theo.
No, let me tell you. Okay, just sidetrack here. Did anybody ever see the episode of Cosby Show where Cliff goes to like Theo when he's in college and sees his apartment, and like his apartment has this fucking machine where they like fucking hit a button and like there's some like tube running against the ceiling or something, and just like a fucking soda like drops or a beer like drops out into their hand. Like the shit is
Chill
I think that's a
out.
good one. I think that's a good one. There was another one. FDR. He was like a conservative as a man that who grew up with two good working legs. However, he has never learned how to walk forward.
I'm weak. I'm weak.
John,
you're
still
muted,
mute.
John. No,
What
I-
does that have to do with Bill Cosby?
No, I'm talking in reference to Joe's statement. It had everything to do with that. It has everything to do with like making a decision that you're not. It has everything to- has
Adjacent
everything to-
discussion.
All right, okay. You know what? It was off topic. You know what? It doesn't even matter. Never mind.
Okay, let's get back to the story. I thought I was going to go through these slides a little faster, but hold on. That's fine. We're having
I'm
fun.
muting myself because I know I want to talk every fucking.
Yeah.
All right, you know what? Yeah, you know
I gotta
what?
beat myself. I gotta beat myself.
He's right. He's
No,
right.
it's okay because I don't want to sit here like this is an online course.
No, but like after we'll just run through everything. I thought.
Yeah, we'll just point. Yeah, we'll just point right back and just saying go all
Okay.
over this motherfucker.
Okay, so Theo.
Okay. All right.
Theodosius. Okay.
Bro, just right.
So-
Just real talk. If you ever met someone in real life now named Theodosius, bro. All right.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
Oh shit.
Drop that beat.
You know what I'm saying? This man is a fucking DJ Theo dope shit.
Dope shit. Oh shit, that's tight, bro.
Dude, that's an emperor's name right there.
The second.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
second.
Theodope shit.
The
My father,
second.
Theodope
Two.
shit, was the dopest
second one.
motherfucker around.
Dopest.
And I killed that motherfucker. Now I got his name.
That's some hard shit, yo. That's some Maui
Oh.
shit.
That's like if they ever did a Last Dragon 2. And
That's like killing
that's
someone
what his
and, like,
name would
eating
be.
them without eating them.
He would be Theodosius. After Leroy leaves, the gang takes over Harlem again. With the Shogun Theodosius. Emperor Theodosius.
Okay.
All right. This is the beginning of the turning point.
All right, my bad,
All
my
right.
bad,
So Theodosius is dope at battle, and he's fighting for control of the empire. And Stilicho is one of his generals. Right. So his title is Magister Militium, which means he's just the master of the military. Alaric is a Gothic leader and sometime Roman foederati, right? So at this point, the Goths are allied with Theodosius, right? So he's fighting people that are trying to come through the throne, and he's got Stilicho in a unit under Alaric of Goths. And if you want to think about what the Goths were like, is just think about like if you were playing like a Command and Conquer type game, they would be like the Viking units. They're like big fucking strong northern men who like drink beer and like wear fucking bear cloths and fucking like go into berserker rages and just kill a bunch of people in battle, right? But it's not like old Roman fucking they don't operate like a Roman legion does where they like have the line and they like are really disciplined and they like do fucking formations and shit, right? They just fucking rage. So So we'll get to more about the Goths, but so what happens at this battle sets the template for what's going to come, right? So the battle's bloodthirsty, and it's important to note Theodosius wins, but the Goth units are put in the front lines, so they bear the most casualties in this battle. And some people suspect that Theodosius did that on purpose to reduce their numbers so that they wouldn't be a threat to him later, even though they were his ally. Okay, so just remember that for later. All right, that's a nice little picture here. Obviously done in a European style, but whatever. But also, there's a lot more cavalry.
That's my 21st birthday party.
What's that?
I said that's my 21st birthday party.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm gonna have to tell you right now, Joe. I really like how you're presenting this because it's taking me back to like human geography and government, and like I just like as soon as you started, there's just like so many quotes have just been popping up in my head, and I'm like, yo, like this shit is fucking hilarious.
Yeah. So Theodosius dies, and the empire split in two. So this is when you get a division after Theodosius, where there's distinctly an eastern side of the empire and a western side of the empire, right? So like before, everybody in the empire kind of considered it one thing, but after this point, you get a pronounced difference between the culture of the east and the culture of the west, right? Okay. So he has 2 kids. So that's the other thing that like caused the split is he's like, okay, I have like 2 kids. One's going to get the east and one's going to get the west, right? So these guys were considered what they called palace emperors, which basically means they were fucking useless, spoiled brats. Like think Saddam Hussein's kids. That's kind of like what they were like, right? Like Uche and Kusei, right? So Stilicho, he's the regent, right? Because none of these Bamas are old enough to fucking actually rule, and they're also fucking useless and just a bunch of wuss. It's basically like Jared Kushner, okay? Just think that, right? So Rufinus, he's in the east, and Stilicho, who we're going to get to and is the hero of this story, he fucking is in the west. All right. So the west is based in Ravenna, which is north of Italy, like past within the Alps, but like in Germany. So Rome is no longer the center of power in the west. Rome's population is actually dropping at this point. At one point, it had like, millions of people in it. At this point, it's starting, people are kind of, after Diocletian, right, you get urban flight, right? So people start to like, there's no jobs in the city anymore, so they like start going to the countryside and signing contracts with people to like basically become serfs. So that's the beginning of serfdom, right? And the east is based in Constantinople. So like, look at these pictures of these dudes, right? Like these guys look fucking useless.
Yeah, milk fed, I think the term is.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Okay, so Stilicho. He's a beast. He's a serious general, half Vandal, half Roman. His dad's a Vandal, which means he's from Germany, but he was in the military and he like rose to rank, so he's legit. He's a Roman citizen. His mom was Roman. He marries Theodosius' daughter Serena to solidify ties between his family, right? So then he basically becomes brother-in-law to the emperor. Stilicho they consider him the last of the Romans because, this is just a title that they give to people that were like the last generals holding the shit together. So that's his deal. He's also a Nicene Christian, which plays into the story later. But basically, Theodosius made Nicene Christianity the official state religion, right? So all the debating at the beginning of Christianity, that kind of goes away. And he crushes the opposition, any like outside Christian sects. Okay, so also the other thing is right, he's tall as fuck and he's like a beast warrior. So that's just what you need to know about him. All right, Alaric, right? So this guy is variously a good guy and a bad guy. And like a good anime, he switches sides a bunch of times. He's the king of the Visigoths. I'm going to explain who they are, but they're basically a division of the Goths. He sometimes is in the service of Rome. He's revered among the Goths, and he's constantly trying to legitimize himself to Rome, right? So that's an important part of the story. Okay, let's talk about the Goths, right? So the Goths are around they start getting talked about in the 3rd century, right? So by the time you get to the 4th century or the 5th century where we're at, like they're already kind of known to the Romans and integrated into society.
Black Lives.
Huh?
I mean, what?
What'd you say?
Black Lives Matter. I mean, what?
Well, no. Well, we're going to get into that, but because I wanted to say, look, here's something you need to understand about the Roman world, right? It's the complete opposite racially to the world that we live in. Okay. So it's basically, if you turned like the racial power structure in America on its head, that's kind of like what it would be like in Rome, which is to say that like among Romans were like, you know, they're Mediterranean, right? And the Roman Empire spans from Spain all the way to the Middle East. So like there's definitely massive amounts of mixing going on. There's also a lot of like migrations going on at the same time. But the other thing that you have to consider in Roman society is that they basically respected all the fucking African empires and nations at the time and considered them like formidable foes, which is why they never went south of like, you know, northern Africa really. And I mean the deepest south they went was Egypt, right? And Egypt doesn't even go that far south compared to the rest of the continent, right? But like the people to the north they considered fucking barbarians. Like, and when I say barbarians, I mean like it was a racial slur. You know what I mean? Like if you didn't use olive oil and drink wine, you were considered unfucking civilized. You were basically considered an animal. You know what I mean? Like you're not even human. You know what I mean? So if you had red hair and fair skin, they're like, what the fuck are you, dude? But like Caesar would go and hang out with like African kings and shit and be like, these people are dope. So it's the complete opposite of the world that we know. So there's that, right? So basically what happens to the Goths is the Huns start kicking around in Eastern Europe and they push the Goths towards the Roman Empire and they come like out of where the Black Sea is, which is like just east in northeast of Greece, right? The other thing is they get Christianized. They get Christianized by a sect of Christianity that's not Nicene Christian or Trinitarian Christian. It's Arianism, which means they think that Jesus is less powerful than God. Whatever. Okay, but that becomes important later. All right. So the Goths are basically a bunch of like of the many Roman tribes that were kicking around at the time that were basically north of the Danube, which was considered like, you know, wilderness, uncivilized people. Right. So Theodosius signs a treaty with them and they get settled in the empire. So then they become allies. So they're semi-integrated into Roman society, but they don't necessarily adopt Roman society. Okay. But they do, the ones that are in the military because they're compelled by the treaty to make up a unit of the military, those people do get integrated into Roman society. Right.
Those treaties usually included mass amounts of gold.
Yes, they would also like receive support from the Roman government. Yeah. But the thing is also the Roman government would fuck them over, which is why they started the Gothic War, which went on right before this. But the other thing is that Theodosius was down with the Goths. Theodosius gave them the land like kind of north of Turkey in what was called Moesia, which is kind of like Armenia and like Romania territory. It's like Central Europe, right? But kind of on the coast of the Black Sea or whatever. So then when they were in Frigidus, like he put them in the front lines and he slaughtered a bunch of them. But there was a point in time where Theodosius trusted the Goths enough that he had them massacre his own citizens. And St. Ambrose actually excommunicated his ass for that shit, which is hilarious. So anyway, Keeping going. All right. So Stilicho, right? Here's his like campaign history. The thing to note is that he meets Alaric like a good anime. He battles Alaric 3 times in his career. Sometimes like he almost destroys Alaric. There's even at one point where he captures Alaric's wife and kids. The thing that you have to know about that is in true anime fashion, Stilicho and Alaric fought together at the Battle of Frigidus, right? So they were fucking like, you know, brothers in arms, but then because of politics, like fucking
Haven't I seen a movie like that?
huh?
Probably seen like 20 movies like
Yeah, I've seen like
that's just
30
good
movies like that.
storytelling, man.
Yeah,
Like,
no, but that's the thing is this is all real.
Yeah.
The
Right?
Universal Soldier was like that.
I mean, narrative, life follows good narrative, and narrative reflects that too. Like, it's like you're saying that the animes are popular now because there is an element of of recognize, like you can see that happening, and you know it's true, like, or at least that's a good story.
Right. So just to go through, so first when he becomes Magister Militium or whatever of the West, like, okay, Alaric gets pissed off that the government is not fucking keeping their side of the treaty, right? So he starts making noise in Greece, and Stilicho goes up there and like kind of just like gets him to roll out, right? And he's about to fucking destroy Alaric, but then the Eastern guy comes and tells the Western guy, he's like, go home. This is our land in Illyrium, which is on the Eastern side. Like, go back to your block, basically. And so he just does it, right? He's like, all right, fuck you. I'll take care of you guys later. But Alaric escapes, right? So then he goes into France, which is what they used to call Gaul, and he fucks some shit up there with, you know, some people rebelling over there. And then the second campaign against Alaric, I think they ended up paying him off or some shit. Then there's a revolt in Africa. He deals with an invasion in Britain. And then Alaric just straight up comes into northern Italy. And because there's another huge invasion going on in Germany, the Senate just has to pay him off, right? So that shit was crazy, you know? And then he tries to like get Illyrium back from the eastern side, and even at one point tells Alaric that he's going to pay him to take over Illyrium and make him the general there. Okay, so like even though they're fighting battles, they're also like cutting deals. Okay, right. Okay, so right, that was the first time. That was the second time, and then yeah. Okay, so what happens to Stilicho? So you saw this list of battles, right? So this guy is the only dude holding the shit together. The Emperor's like useless. This dude is the number one go-to dude. He's the Joint Chiefs of Staff in like one person. So what happens to him? The Danube River on a really cold winter freezes over, and huge, like 3 or 4 different tribes of Germans like come pouring across the border for a planned invasion. And Stilicho's so fucked up that he doesn't have enough troops that he pulls the legions from Britain, abandons Britain to like an usurper, like makes some rocks fall in the Alps path and like seals off that part of the empire forever. And like uses those forces to repel all the people coming over the frozen river. So after that happens, Alaric rolls into town contemporaneously, and he gets the Senate to pay him off. But the Senate's pissed off, so they go to the Emperor, who's the useless tool, and they tell him that Stilicho is planning to take over the empire with Alaric, which wasn't really true. Alaric just wanted to be in the Roman military because he'd already served that shit. He was a veteran, for God's sakes. So, right. So what happens is that rumors that he had planned the assassination of the dude in the East that was running shit in the East, right? There was a revolt, right? So they plan a coup against him. He goes to Ravenna. And he goes, a bunch of his people want to, like, the dudes that are his senior, like, lieutenants are like, dude, we should just take over. And he says no, right? Like, that's how honorable this dude is. He goes to a church and they catch him up with him at a church and they fucking murder him. They murder his kids. And then on top of that, because he was half Vandal, there was like an anti-immigration like wave that hit all of Rome, and they fucking massacre all the Goths in the city, all their fucking children, all of that shit. You know, yeah, 30,000, right? 30,000 of them flee and go to Alaric because half of you have to remember a lot of the Roman military was Gothic because the Romans weren't putting out their own troops. It was all outsourced. So they flee to Alaric, about 30,000, right? Then comes the sack of Rome. Alaric sieges Rome 3 times. After the death of Stilicho, he's like, fuck these motherfuckers. I'm tired of trying to integrate to society. They are either going to give me my shit or I'm going to fuck shit up. So he takes his army, he goes down there. During the first siege, okay, there's this chick named Galla Placidia. She's Honorius's sister, right? And there was suspicion of royal incest between them. So this story has everything. It has battles. It has royal incest. Yeah. So
are they twins?
Get this. Remember, Stilicho married Theodosius' daughter, right? So Galla Placida, who's trapped in the city with Stilicho's wife, is like, oh, you know, she needs to die. So they killed Serena, who was Theodosius' daughter. Okay. So then I think they ended up paying Alaric off. So the second siege, Jovius ends up being one of Stilicho's boys, and he's like, let's see if we can negotiate. But Honorius is a dick. He's sitting in the palace. He sends some letter to Alaric, and instead of the guy who was talking, like, reads the letter and he says it word for word instead of like leaving the insults out. So Alaric's pissed. So he marches on the city, and the Senate gets scared, and they appoint like a puppet emperor, and like Honorius like flees the city, and he's about to like roll out and abdicate, and then 4,000 troops from the east show up to help him out. So they basically buy off Alaric again, and they make him a general, and he goes down to like possibly like solve a problem in Africa, which is where all the grain from Rome came from. And the fucking puppet emperor didn't want to do anything. So, you know, Alaric says, fuck you, I'm stripping you of your emperorship, and he goes back to negotiate with Honorius. All right. So outside the city, he goes to meet Honorius, and so they can negotiate, but instead Honorius sends an assassin and betrays him. And so he says, he escapes the treachery, and now he's really pissed. He's like, okay, now I'm going to besiege you. They're starving in the city, cannibalism starts, and somebody gets really, really hungry and opens the Salarian gate, and in pour the Goths. And okay, so here's the other thing is you can see the hate, right? Look at this picture, right? Like, look how the Goths are like portrayed like savages, right? This isn't what they were like. Like, look back on the hold on a second. Look back at this picture. I see
what's going on, though. I see what's going on.
Look at this picture, right? Like, this is a little bit more accurate because they were like integrated into Roman society, right? But look at this picture. It's like, nah, y'all are just naked, uncivilized barbarians, right? Okay, so depictions, right? Now, here's the thing. is the Goths are Arian Christians. So when they sacked the city, they allowed people to take refuge in St. Paul and St. Peter's churches. And the other thing is they didn't like really fuck churches up. They did fucking scatter the ashes of like famous emperors. They like busted the tombstone, and because it was basically like saying fuck the government.
Can I say something real quick about this dude in the picture? Like, so
Yeah.
we've got the Goths basically naked, climbing a marble statue, trying to hang a noose over it or whatever, so I can pull over the statue. But
Yeah.
then on the bottom left of the picture, where with everybody at the bottom, and there's a whole bunch of people holding the ropes, trying to pull the statue down, coming from the bottom up, right, all the way down to the left. When you look at the left with a hand that's gesturing up, there's a guy on a horse that looks like he would have been one of the Visigoths. That's just, just sitting here, just, watching to make sure nothing crazy goes down while they pull all that shit down.
Yeah, hold on a second, John. Let me find out who did the picture.
Also, Eugene, you said basically naked.
Yeah, they butt ass naked, basically. You know what I'm saying? They're naked. One dude's butt ass naked, other dude's got a sash to, hide some stuff. But yeah, I see what's going on because they're using the depiction of no clothes to show the savagery. But then at the same time, you can see one of their guys in that same armor.
Okay, this is it's 1890. Joseph Noel Silvestri.
Okay, 1890.
Let's see here. French artist, notable for his studies of classic scenes from antiquity. Right. So obviously after the Renaissance, right, because the Renaissance happened, like they portrayed like the Germans like they were super barbarian, right?
Mm. Right. Yeah.
Hold on, the dog's freaking out. I'll be right. Give me a second.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I was curious about that because, he's talking about depictions, and depending on what time period, you had different heroes in history and all that. Like the same, I don't know who did it, and this is a different epoch. But when Rome was strong, they took over France, and their hero was this guy Vercingetorix. And he got it really bad. He had the most successful resistance at that point, and they crushed his army. And when he went to surrender, they kept him alive. Caesar kept him in captivity for like decades and paraded him around like a circus freak, at his I think they killed him at Caesar's triumph. Like before then, he had just been carted around, and then he basically did a blood sacrifice, and the Romans were like disgusted by it. But that's how the fucking Romans rolled, man.
Well, I'll tell you right now, like, I'm not going to touch on your point because, I mean, that's the present topic, but I do want to go back to the whole Theo thing. I'm telling you right now. Because I've been thinking about this before.
I leave for 2 seconds and we back to the Theo.
Look, before we even got to this, I had so many points about that, because it just brought me back to like government class. I mean, you think of like Harry Truman, man. He was one of the ones that was essentially like, what is a president other than a fucking public figure that kisses and hugs people and kicks them in the ass for doing what they were supposed to be doing in the fucking first place.
Okay, so let's we're almost done. So
fucking soft. What was the palace? He's a fucking palace emperor, bro.
Yeah, exactly, right. So the sack, nonetheless, was by the standards of the age restrained. There was no general slaughter of the inhabitants, and 2 main basilicas of Peter and Paul were nominated places of sanctuary. Most of the buildings and monuments in the city survived intact. So it's like they were Christian when they sacked it. But they sacked that joint for 3 days, and they scattered the ashes of Augustus and Hadrian, and yeah. So
Look at
the
that.
dude who was raising a stink in Africa, he took over. He was basically the count, or they called it a comes of Africa, and he sold some of the young refugees. So many people fled Rome when this happened that he sold some of the refugees into Eastern brothels.
Jeez.
Yeah, that's that wartime shit. Okay, so here's a
I mean,
picture.
you're talking about wartime Christians. Wartime Christians are the dirtiest people in all of time.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a great picture. I also have the artist somewhere too, if you want to know who it is, John. But this is Honorius, right? So Honorius was such a little bitch. Like this guy was obsessed with chickens and birds, right? So he had a chicken named Roma. Okay, he had a pet chicken named Roma. I cannot make this shit up. He had a pet
remember
chicken named Roma, and when they told him that Rome was burning in Ravenna, in his palace at Ravenna, he was like, "Oh no, what happened to my chicken?" Because he misheard it as Roma instead of Rome, right? So he was more worried about his pet fucking chicken than he was about the city that was basically the capital of the Western world burning. Yeah, right. So you see like the disaffected look on him here, where he's like, "Oh, all I care about is my pigeons and chicken." Okay, so he also took Honorius's sister as a hostage, as like a bride hostage. So like Alaric's a bad guy, but he's kind of dope. And then he rolled out and he wanted to go.
Kind of sounds like the first John Paul.
So Alaric wanted to go take over the province of Africa because that's where all the grain was. Like it was the bread. The way they call Ukraine the breadbasket of Russia is like that's what Africa was and Egypt were to Rome. Like Rome it was such a huge city it hadn't fed itself in centuries. So if you controlled Africa, you controlled Rome as well. But he died on the way from illness. So he was so loved by his followers that they buried him with his treasure and they redirected a riverbed so that nobody would know where he was buried. So somewhere he's out there. Somewhere there's an Indiana Jones real life fucking tomb of Alaric buried with his treasure under a river. So that's kind of a cool aspect of the story.
I'm going to tell you one thing that I know for sure. This is just some Nat Geo shit. There isn't only one like tomb that they found of Christians or Templars that exist.
Yeah, so all right. So to finish up, I think that's actually it. That's the end of the thing. But my main point is, and because I didn't do the takeaways, and all I'm going to say is that here, my takeaway and part of my theory with this story is that it's a failure of Rome in the late era to integrate people into their society that happened during the Principate and during the Republic age. That like people that were outside of the empire that then became part of the empire were integrated fully into Roman society. And that was gone later on. And they treated the Goths like shit. Sound familiar? for look, okay, there's a story where the Eastern guy, they sold them rat meat, but they made them sell their kids for it, and it was poisoned rat meat.
Jesus Christ.
Okay.
No, what he's telling is true. I remember learning about that.
It's just a lot of stuff where you can't have such disparities within a culture. You can't have such differences of standard within a culture. And like, yeah, because the Visigoths lived on the outskirts. The land that they first got was shit land, and then your boy actually gave them decent land, but it took some fighting and a lot of a lot of their own like, hey, if you're not going to hold up the deal, then why shouldn't we just take it? You know.
Well, that's the other thing about Stilicho is that, dude, he tried to get the emperors and the Senate to understand that this guy was not fucking around, that Alaric was basically kind of like the Malcolm X that was also a general of the Goths, right? Like, he was trying to get them integrated into society, and Stilicho understood that because he was an integrated half barbarian dude, right?
And he's also like, he's called the last Roman general for a reason. And it's like, you know, as grimy as the Romans were, like the military tradition was one of honor.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying is that even though he was of half Roman lineage, he was more Roman in his actions.
Yeah,
right?
That stood for something for him.
And that's the other thing is that's why I consider this story the fall of the Roman Empire. And the reason why is because the history after this point repeats itself. You have more useless emperors. You have more foreign German or Vandal or Suebi or Alain generals coming in that are running the military, and they basically are the power behind the throne. And what happens in 476 is that an Ostrogothic, another division of the Goths, guy rolls in, gets rid of the emperor, and sends the royal seal back to the east. So the history just repeated itself after this point. There was always like a German general. There's another dude that's considered the last of the Romans named Flavius Aetius. And it's the same story.
And
he's the only one holding it together, and the fucking emperors are useless.
Hold on, what's his name again?
Flavius Aetius.
Flavius.
My man's Flavius.
Yeah. Well, I think Stilicho was named Flavius too. I think Flavius in Latin means you had red hair. So that was the thing about Germans is Mediterranean, the people that were Roman and in the Roman Empire, they all had dark hair, right? Like it was weird to have red or blonde hair. You know what I mean? Some people had blonde hair and it was like, okay, but yeah, I think Flavius means because the Flavian dynasty also had red hair. And I think that was like the whole deal with them, of which Marcus Aurelius was one of them as well. What was I going to say?
Meditations right here.
Yeah. So the other thing is I wanted to look at this thing. Look at the immigration here, right? The Huns start making a noise on the eastern steppes, and they basically push the Goths up to here where Moesia is, right? If you think like north of Macedonia.
Yeah.
So it's like Armenia, right? So then the Visigoths, which is under Alaric, they go to Rome and they sack it. The Vandals come down later after the story of Stilicho. They come down all the way, they microwave all the way here, and they take over Carthage, and they basically become a Vandal empire for a new, like a Neo-Carthaginian empire at the late stage of the Roman Empire. The Ostrogoths come in, and they're basically the ones that end the Roman story. Huh? What'd you say?
I said that makes sense because Carthage was basically like already like pretty much weak and ruled by that point.
It would basically be like if it would be like this. It would be like if Mexicans took over California.
Sorry,
there was a time where it was already there.
Well, no, that's true. I'm just trying to draw an analogy. Okay, so my whole deal is when it comes to the Roman Empire, there's a lot of theories, right? Like you've got this guy. Where is he? Oh, damn it. Where did the fucking... Oh, yeah, here he is, right? This is the guy that wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Now, he thought that because the empire went Christian, that they lost the Roman martial values that you were talking about, John.
Yeah.
And that was his big deal. But he kind of had like an Enlightenment anti-Christian bias a little bit. So it's not necessarily true. When I think about the fall of the Roman Empire, when I analyze it, I'm like, it's a failure of immigration policy. It's a lot. There's a loss of the middle class that happened in the crisis of the 3rd century, right? Like the people that were at the top of the society stopped interacting with the people at the bottom of the society. There was massive division in the empire. There was massive like racial bias, which is weird because it was basically like the anti-white people, which is hilarious, to think about, but it was true.
Well, that's why I always tell people it's all relative. Like whatever is going on in our time, you can switch hats and it could be happening the same way in a different time and different way.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Yeah.
there is a slow trickle in history too sometimes, but that's true. The other thing is that you have to consider that like right before Theodosius, there was the Battle of Adrianople, and that's why the Goths were considered a serious force and they had to get integrated into society because they killed a Roman emperor in battle.
Yeah.
Which is fucking amazing. You know what I mean? Like that had never fucking happened.
Never happened. Yeah.
So like the Goths were like the real deal. And so what happened to them at the end of the story, the aftermath is that they settled in the Visigoths after Alaric. They buried him under the river and then they settled in Spain. And that's why most of the Gothic architecture in the super old churches that are before the Sassanid, before the Islamic Empire came in, right? Like that was all Gothic stuff, right? Yeah. So like if you think of those churches and the way they almost look medieval, even though we're talking late antiquity here. So I'm saying the seeds of the Middle Ages in modern Europe were like sown in the fall of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Right? Like think about it. The Franks became France. The Alemanni became Germany. To the point that in Spanish, the way you say German is Alemanni, even though that is an old Latin word, right?
In Latin, even in French, it's the same thing, Alemania.
Yeah, or if you think Alsace-Lorraine, Alemanni, right? So the other thing is that what's her name? Galla Placidia, Honor's sister. She like literally became like a constant like marital, sexual, political bargaining chip.
She get married off a bunch.
Like she is the image when you think of like knights in a castle saving the damsel in distress. That's Galla Placidia. She was constantly the hostage bitch. Like she was getting tossed around like a political token all the time. So she has a crazy life as like this like hostage wife, where German warlords are like taught, like, basically like cashing her in at a bank. Shit was ridiculous. So they settle in Spain, and then they actually end up joining the Roman Empire later in history to fight against Attila the Hun. Yeah. So it just shows you how how shifting alliances worked in the Roman Empire. Like, a couple centuries later, you could be, integrated, or you could be not. You could be helpful. You could be their enemy, And if you think about it this way, right? Like the Roman Empire, because they failed the Goths and they didn't match up to their agreements and, did fucked up shit to them and exacerbate, they created their own enemy. Does that sound familiar? It sounds a little fucking familiar to me if you think about American history, right? So there's a lot of things in this story that compare, because empires are all about being able to integrate people into the empire. That's what makes an empire successful. And if that doesn't happen, that's when empires start to fall. And I think
that's also the reason they fall. Like
that's exactly what I'm saying.
The dilution of citizenship, like the original Romans that were loyal to the Senate, there was a clear standard of what citizenship was. And along with what you're saying, those laws around citizenship got looser and looser and less stringent. And then all of a sudden everybody's a citizen. And you can't make everybody happy the same way if you have a more monolithic group of people.
Don't get it twisted. Because think about it this way. Remember at the beginning when I was like, look, the nationalist sentiment failed, right? Like the emperors were coming from the east, right? So the aristocracy was still in Rome. Like the Senate was still functioning. It just had less and less power, right? So the way that executive powers and the president have gained in American society, that also happened with the emperorship, right?
But I mean, the Senate never meant anything after like Caesar took over.
Nah,
Like,
that's not necessarily true.
It was never the same power structure.
No, it was never the same,
You
and
know.
especially like right after Caesar, it kind of didn't matter. But like, trust me, dude, like every good emperor knew that they could just get the Senate to do the work. You see what I mean? Like there was no federal agencies until Diocletian, right? So that's not till 300 AD. So most of the time, the Senate was the one that was doing that work, administrative work. You know what I mean? Making the courts move. You know what I mean? Like making sure the budgets were. You know what I mean? Like the Senate lasted after the fall of Rome. So the Senate.
Yeah, but I mean the things that I can't show right now that were happening was that like even during the Caesarian Civil War, there were changes to like who could become a consulate and when and how long, and there were changes to the size of the Senate. There were changes to who qualified to becoming, Senate.
Well, that's what Caesar did that pissed everybody off.
And that's what, and like,
is that the only people that could be fucking senators, and in fact, the only people that could be citizens in the original Roman Republic were land-owning aristocrats in Rome. Like nobody else in Rome could be a fucking citizen.
There were ways to get it, because there was always a way to become a Roman. They always let you become a Roman.
Because if you were a citizen, if you were a Roman soldier.
If you became a soldier, and like a lot of times if you were a Roman soldier, you'd get some land, and maybe not your generation, but a generation after, you'd get that citizenship. And like that's what I mean. The standards were high and they were clear as to how you became a Roman. And then because of expedience over time, they're like, well, shit, these guys are going to fucking wreck our shit if we don't do something right now. Oh, shit, we have more slaves than we know what to do with right now. We got to make some of them free. And, like, the difference between being a slave and a citizen is huge. And the difference between,
well, in the middle, you have freeman, which means you're not a slave, but you're not a citizen.
Yeah,
right?
But I mean,
because look, you can be a citizen of the Roman Empire, but not have voting rights, right?
And and that's what I mean. And like some of those moves, they would piss off one group of people who didn't quite get rights because they didn't agitate the same way another group did. And like,
but also, John, the thing that you have to realize is there's no voting anymore after Caesar.
Yeah, how did you?
I mean, no legitimate voting. It didn't matter.
No, there's just no voting.
There was. What you're saying, there was voting.
Oh, well, in the Senate and with the consulships and all that stuff, yeah.
Yeah, but, a lot of it was mob rule anyway. Like, when you go into, like, the history of when Rome was still the city, like, in order to run that city, like, the guys on the ground, imagine, like, imagine the mayor of Baltimore just being like, I'm just gonna get the gangs to run this city.
That's exactly what
and I'm just, I'm not gonna say that I'm doing it, but every time I have a problem,
but it's beyond that, John. Is the whole concept of mafia and gangs comes from the way that Roman society was from, because it was all about family allegiances.
And that's what I was gonna say because when you're talking about the breakup, when something like Rome breaks up, when something like the British Empire breaks up, it doesn't just like go away, obviously. We're still dealing with repercussions from colonialism and all that shit. And like,
but just before you add your next point, I want to shovel in here for your consideration that like the wave of like anti-immigration and like nationalistic and isolationist tendencies that we're experiencing is exactly what happened in this fucking story.
Yeah, see, that's what I wanted to say real quick. Like the levels of adoption are like, it's kind of gross when you actually look at it. Like when you're saying based on the land, like I'm like, how the fuck do you become a landowner in Roman society then? Like how did
they give it to you as a bonus in military service or as a pension.
Okay, so
it was your retirement.
You could
buy freedom too. Like you could.
You
earned your own wages.
Okay. So that's an important point that John is pointing out is that slavery was like completely different in the Roman Empire. Not only was it it non-exclusive, like anybody of any race or creed could be a slave. Like all you had to do was get captured in battle and you were gonna be a slave, right?
Or just get shanghaied. Like,
But
also, they
also,
sold all those
just
bitches.
take
yeah,
a
or
fucking-
get shanghaied, yeah.
Or just take $35,000 in fucking debt real quick from the
But most of
goddamn
it
country.
is you get slaves out of the women and children from battles. That's
I'm just
that's
saying, this
part
is
of the
kinda like
economy.
the level.
So, but
like,
the other
this
thing is
fucking
that
lateral-
John's right. You could legally buy
Terrible.
your freedom, or what would often happen is that when somebody died, they would free them in the will. You know what I mean? So, and they all would also give them money. Like they would have like accounts that would get released to them upon becoming free.
Yeah.
So it was a lot different structure. Like there was like manuals about like why you should treat your slave properly and not abuse them, and that's what a real Roman citizen does. Like very different.
And a lot of that reads.
Bro, it's in the Bible
like,
right now.
A lot of that reads
This is
like
before the
how-
Bible's written.
How the.
But what I'm
fucking-
saying, how it compares laterally to right now, like because that's the whole point.
But a lot of
this, how
the
this compares
treatment
to
of
society right
slaves,
now.
if you read it, it sounds like how if you're reading like a Muslim text, they talk about treating their wives. You know, like good treatment.
Oh, you mean paternalistic?
No, just good treatment is a definition that doesn't
Right.
cross cultural lines all the time. So
well,
yeah,
except when Americans do slavery, right?
well, no, because that's peculiar because it's like you said, slavery was open back in the day, but as soon as they saw what happened in Haiti, it became political.
Oh well, you're talking centuries later too.
Yeah, it's a totally different thing.
Yeah, you're
but,
talking
like,
1,000 years fucking later.
Yeah,
so.
and that's what I mean. It's never going to be a like for like comparison, and it wasn't the same problems they were doing. But like, that's another big reason why Rome fell. It was a slave society, and you can't prop up. You know, that you can't have the writer not control the elephant, and after a while, it's not just immigration. It's just you're bringing in all these people who have no say in the society. They have no say in what's going on. You know what?
But they were already there. That's what I'm saying. Is
But
that
the numbers were like the growth of slaves towards the end are ridiculous, because it's like you're saying nobody had jobs because who's doing the jobs? You know, it wasn't just that the urban situation didn't make sense. Like,
but it's also the hyperinflation. It's also the
hyperinflation, the
hyperinflation, and it's also think about the economic stuff
checks
that they passed, right? Like the Diocletian did. Like he tried to make price controls, and he you know, like it worked and it didn't, right? Like
price controls never worked. It didn't work.
Yeah, they create black markets.
Yes, every time. Every time you tell me that I can't go over this price for a good that's scarce and really hard to come by, I'm gonna sell it under the table. Like, never works. Not even once.
But
and
the other thing is that there was a division. There was a death of the middle class in the Roman society.
Yeah.
Where
like,
you did not have. There was an emperor that came after Diocletian, but before Theodosius, who like basically they like stopped using people from the aristocratic class as Roman officers, which in the Roman Republic was like the whole point of society. That was the top of society, is that the rich people entered military service so they wouldn't be a bunch of bitches.
Yeah.
And so that they would mix with the lower soldiers, learn how to lead them, and then thus become, you know, the proper Roman ideal, right?
That's the other the corruption of institutions. It's like on a man
and the outsourcing of the military, right?
But that's what I mean. The corruption of the institutions is on a man-to-man basis. So you're telling us about a guy who's in love with his chicken, and you're trying to imagine him going up against the fucking German hordes in Alsace.
Yeah,
you're trying to imagine him going to the Sahara.
But he's
fighting.
not really even barely involved in decisions at that point.
No,
like, that's
but
how
he
bad.
represents the other shitty fucking aristocracy. That's why I'm talking about him, because he's the guy we talked about. But if everybody's this chicken lover, like, and you have a warlike society that only survived because of constant expansion and constant defense of their
Well, no. After
borders.
Trajan, there's no more expansion.
Yeah, but you're always at the borders. You're always fighting some enemy.
Very true.
You're always recruiting some. Like, it's just the way we're always sending people off to go kill somebody. you know, and like it takes a cost, and if you're not getting, like, that loses value too, you know, like it really does lose value to always
Hold on,
be
you
at
lost
war.
me.
It just becomes
You lost
costly.
me there. You lost me
Yeah,
there.
that's true. They did have to maintain the border. They called it the limes, the like outer limits. Yeah.
Yeah, Hadrian's building walls, and like you just got guys who are out there, and they're not as good as their fathers or their grandfathers. They don't know why it's as important as it was
Well, but that's why
before.
Gibbon talked about the Christianity, because the Roman religion, right? Like if you think about Gladiator, what the Roman religion was about, it wasn't really about, okay, yeah, you had like the Greek gods, right, that are the Roman versions, but think about Russell Crowe's character in Gladiator, right? Like he's constantly carrying around that pouch of the little wooden statues.
Yeah.
That's what Roman religion was really about, was what they called the household gods.
Yeah.
And that like had the martial philosophy like in it, like the self-reliance, all the things that are like make up the Roman ideal. Those things went away after Roman paganism became illegal.
It's a dilution, because even just think about, like, it wasn't just Christianity. They were competing religions, like out of Egypt.
Yeah. But the pagan society, Roman pagan society was like, they didn't give a fuck if you believed in other religions. They didn't persecute them. Just the Christians, because they were weird.
Well, they also recognize the influence, and that's what I mean. So it's like, if you keep saying that this is the highest, but all of a sudden, you know, ISIS is more popular, and then you've got this Jesus guy who doesn't care what you do to him. He's just going to keep talking about his Jesus cult. Like, you know, and like, want to get weird, talk about the rebellions that the Jews caused, and like the tit for tat that they did. There were whole.
Oh, after Jesus, what was that? What was that rebellion? The one at Masada?
Yeah, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people that got killed because they thought they needed revenge for their treatment in Jerusalem. And like, you know, I can't call sides on it. I just know that each side was willing to commit an atrocity for every atrocity that was committed against them. And that's just kind of how history went. And yeah, it just seems silly when everyone's like, that's not fair. I'm like, go read a history book. Shut the fuck up. Like, fair is waking up and not having your nephew with his skin inside out on your front lawn. Like, we're not good to each other. We're really not good to each other at all. See that bitch who got tased in her pregnant stomach? Like, what is that about, man?
Wait, what happened there?
There's a video floating around of this lady, and she's being detained, and this cop seems to only care about putting the fucking juice to her belly, and she's pregnant. And like, I was fucking disgusted. I don't know what I was expecting to. I don't know why I even watch these videos anymore. It just brings my like estimation of humanity. I'm not down, but it just, if there's like a storage of like all the fucked up shit I've seen on the internet and all the things I expect from people, like that room just keeps getting bigger and bigger, you know? Just wild, dumb shit.
You'll be able, man. You can just Google anything. You can find the most fucked up
Remember
shit.
Rotten.com?
Constantly being like, yes, I'm saying you can constantly find shit being uploaded right now. Like that's even worse. Like
Well,
that's
there was also a larger
like,
point I wanted to make about the story that I told, and that's basically that every fucking empire always has, you know, one or two, sometimes multiple oppressed classes. Like the Spartans had the Helots.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
it's a murder if you ritualistically every year.
Yeah, the American society has
what
you
I'm
know.
saying, what I'm saying is that, well, I think Joe, you're probably about to make the same point, but there are physical properties into the things that we decide to worship as idols, essentially. We do it more metaphorically now than we did before, because there were, I mean, you can look at it from any history books, you can look at it from any biblical text. You can look at it from any stance of like text that has to do with religion. Like there were physical properties to making moral conception for the masses, and we do that less now, but it's still all the same.
I don't know. My thing is that the push towards nationalism that you see in our culture and that you saw at the end of the Roman Empire, where they started talking about, you know, some of the, this is what the people are. This is what the American people are, right? This is what they look like. That same shit was going on in Roman society. And there you had Stilicho, who wasn't even, you know, fully Roman. I mean, he was Roman in society. You know what I mean? He was fully integrated. He was in the system, and they still killed him and his children. You know what I mean? And his fucking wife. You know what I mean? Like, so when you think about shit like Charlottesville, you know what I mean? To me, it just seems like decline of an empire.
I don't think
But yeah,
that's,
it's almost like this story justifies it, though, because if they had better standards, they probably would have stuck around longer. Maybe not in the same capacity, but what happened?
Justifies what?
Nationalism. What happened in the East? They kept to the standards. They kept progressing, and they survived for another 1,000 years.
To John's point, look, that's the point that I'm also trying to make. I'm talking about physical properties of like what we decide to believe, right? The whole thing is that there are parallels to what are happening right now, what happened at the fall of the Roman Empire, based off of the fact that like, let me put it plainly, and if you don't follow me, fine. But this is the analogy that works for me. You are a CEO of a company, right? And you started up the company by yourself. Then you decided to hire masses of people to do all of the jobs for you that you were doing by yourself. You would expect everybody that you hired to do the exact same jobs that you were doing by yourself. So as a result of that, if they don't do that or comply with what your quote unquote vision is, then they deserve to die. Or in the context of what we're talking about in modern day, they just deserve to be fired. But yeah. No, because I feel like that's what I was picking up on, John. You can tell me if I was wrong, but that's what I was picking up on. Like that's how the parallel works for me.
I mean, I don't know if you get capital punishment for taking, like in a more milder sense, if you start a company, say in the 70s or the 50s.
If you don't pull, look, hold on.
No. You made your death pact business over here. Like if you start a company in one time and then the people that come after you have different standards and different ideals, and
the different standards come from the source. The different standards come from the source.
No, the different standards come from
no,
time.
the different standards come from the source.
What source? That's what source? If you have a company that started in the 50s, it's of that time. And those ideals and those standards are what allows it to grow. And then over time, those standards change. And that's what we're seeing now. That's why you could put Aunt Jemima on the front of a fucking pancake box and nobody gave a shit. And
John,
what really mattered was the ability to sell pancakes. Now it's more about, does that picture make me feel good as a human being versus can I sell pancakes? And that's the standard. The Romans cared about, are we good Romans? Can we conquer other peoples? And then when that stopped being important, then they stopped being Romans. They stopped being able to conquer other peoples, and they stopped being able to maintain their own lands because they stopped knowing how to do that. It wasn't important. All the stuff that came from conquering other peoples, money, power, and like influence, they used to get fucked up, you know, become more decadent, and to lose sight of the things that actually held the institutions together. So if you're busy at an orgy or making sure your pet chicken has enough grain, you're not marshaling your troops, you're not keeping your body in good shape, you're not like making sure that, you know, everyone's fed and like the economy's in good shape. You don't care. You're just a hedonist. And you know, that's what I was saying, like, you know, they were scared of certain religions because they did have an influence and the people in them were stronger than the people in their religion. So
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like I was only trying to make the same point as you. Like, the thing is that the influence is there. I'm not talking about like some death pack type shit. What I'm saying is that like there was some death pack type shit back then. Now, like all we do is do battle in words, right? So like here
I
anyway,
don't know,
I'm not
they're out
like
there
I'm not.
shooting.
We do battle in words only because all of the things that happen at the fall of the Roman Empire are already happening behind the scenes. We can't see it, but we know it's happening.
You can see it.
Okay. And I mean we see it, but the point I'm trying to make is like it's not visible within our bubble, right? They figured out a way to put us within bubble so we don't see it. Period. And like or if it's happening within our bubble, we only pertain it to what's still happening only around us, especially if you don't watch the news or if you don't research your sources or if you decide to make an opinion based off of something that's not fact. I mean, we attack each other. And if we get into a position like where we start thinking our ideals and our like value to opinion and our um like we think that our values aren't manufactured, then we forget that we've already been put in a situation for hundreds of thousands of years where we're a slave to people that control us and our own opinion. We have an opinion based off of what has been fed to us since birth.
That's
I mean,
not
it's a simple.
necessarily true.
I mean, no.
Yeah.
That is necessarily true because
No.
the whole thing is like, look, if I grew up in a country that is predominantly Muslim, right, and I believe that, you know what, I'm gonna marry this girl and I'm gonna marry a couple other girls too, not only because I want to or because that's what I believe, but there's also pressure that has been put on me because that's what the generations before me believed. If I go against that, then you know what? I might be shunned. I might not be spoken to again. And ultimately,
Yeah,
I
but
may
plenty
be
of
killed.
people have dealt with those consequences. Like, making decisions just means dealing with the consequences. Just because there's pressure to do
The
something
consequence
doesn't.
of death?
Yeah, a lot of people do deal with that consequence. A lot of people. Like, it's not an insurmountable thing. A lot of people choose that consequence. All the suicide bombers, they were looking forward to death. Death isn't the end for some people, especially if you're religious. If listen to all those gospel songs and all those Negro spirituals, they're all begging for death because life is so fucking shitty. Like, a lot of these are death. Death doesn't mean a lot to some people, man. Like, go to war, you better get close to the idea that this could be the last thing you do, you know? Like, death isn't the deterrent that a lot of people think it is. You know, look at the kids outside. They're out there. They know they could die by a cop, by another kid. Like, I just heard about these kids that are killing people and they're like 12, 13 years old. That's how old they start, man. Like,
So my question to you is that not perpetuating the issue of like the ideals of what Joe was talking about? Because I mean, we kill each other
Mm.
locally or personally, rather, I'll say personally, then we get to a point where it's state versus state or race versus race, ideal versus ideal. So how is how is what you're saying any different than what we've been doing for hundreds of thousands of years?
Honestly, Eric, none of what you're saying is clear enough for me to know the difference between what you're describing and what I'm supposed to be saying. Like, I don't understand what you're trying to say. Like, you talk about slavery for hundreds of thousands of years. It's not referring to anything specific enough for me to be like, yeah, this is what happened in this country or that country or with this group or with that group. The only group that have been doing slavery for that long are in like the Middle East, and they don't give a fuck about anybody. You know, slavery in this country, hundreds of years at most, and that's taken on lots of different forms, and it ended. You know, you can say what you want about the laws after that, but slavery, the actual institution, ended in 1865. Like, I have an uncle who almost got sold into slavery. He wasn't in America, he was in Africa. So, like, there's that, you know. My point was that the dilution of standards, when you lose your standards, when you lose what's important to you, when you allow new people to come in and redefine what that is without strengthening what that is, that's when you lose the institutions. That's when you lose your country. That's when you lose what's important. And if important, you know, if in America, you know, the middle class is important, the idea that you should grow wealth and continue to grow wealthy and your children should benefit from the same things that you got to, and they should get stronger and smarter and better protected every generation, then we lost that, and we're continuing to losing it, and the people that are around us don't even want that to be around. So yeah, that was my point. That was my point. And that's the parallel I was saying. If you were a Roman citizen, you had duties. It wasn't just a privilege. You had things you had to do. And in America, if you were an American, there were things that people expected of you. And now it's not the same way. You just make demands of the government, and that expediency is what undid the Romans, and it's what I'm seeing today, and I can't say it's any different. You know?
Yeah, but the other thing is when you talk about the loosening of policies, that wasn't because it wasn't the Goths that watered it down. You know what I mean?
And I think that's too specific time frame. That's why I tried to keep bringing up all of the things over time that kept happening. Like, you expand the Senate so it includes more lower class members and people just to fill ranks for when, you know, some Machiavellian higher senator wants to get something pushed through. You loosen the rules around who gets to be a consulate, you know. Like, look at how executive orders are being used. The last 3 presidents have made the record for the most executive orders each term that they've used them.
Right, right.
And you're not supposed to legislate from the executive. And then look at how the judiciary is being used. You're not supposed to make laws from the courts. And like, the whole reason that we had checks and balances is because lawmaking and the execution of laws was supposed to be arduous and slow. It's not supposed to happen. It's not just supposed to happen like that. You know, you aren't supposed to be able to demand something and then have somebody reflect what you want in society, because we change our minds so quickly and we don't get to see the actual fallout from that for quite some time, you know. Like,
Yeah, but my thing is,
I feel like what you're talking about John.
My thing is your point about expanding the Senate doesn't really matter, because when the Senate got expanded under Caesar, after Caesar, like you yourself said, the Senate didn't really matter. You know what I mean? It still
But
ran some.
there were still functions that they had, and they would do whatever it take to make it so that the functions would benefit the person in power. So if Caesar wanted a law passed and he knew that there were enough conservatives to block it, he would get a bunch of guys off the street and give them some purple robes, and all of a sudden they're senators. They're not senators by the definition that lasted for hundreds of years before then, but they're senators.
Well, but it wasn't quite like that. Like he didn't delegitimize the process that much. Like
he did. He flat out did. Him and Mark Antony packed the Senate. They did that all the time.
Yeah, but the people
they were copied throughout.
Yeah, but hold on a second. The thing is that meant the provinces had representation, where before they were just ruled by military governors. You know what I mean? They were trying to get those people fucking representation. You know what I mean?
I don't think it's not that altruistic, and honestly, I don't have enough knowledge to say that it was always like that. But there were moments in time where they're like, "Oh, we're gonna make it so that you can vote again," or this guy.
I'm gonna be straight up honest with you, Joe. I'm gonna have to agree with Kwame on this one. The whole thing is that you have to think about it. A lot of these guys, what you're talking about, that were military leaders, a lot like what's happening right now, have already had conversations with the powers that be.
What I'm
saying is that they've already had conversations with the powers that be, and on top of that, not only because the people wanted them to be elected as their official, it also was a pass from whoever were the powers that be to be like, look, you can rule over this land. Why? Because all we really want is order. That's it.
I mean, my thing is that you can't. Obviously, Caesar and fucking Antony were not fucking motivated by altruistic concerns, but I don't think that you can necessarily cast their decision as putting senators in from the provinces into the Senate as entirely just like Senate packing, much akin to like FDR's court packing.
There were moments where if Caesar lost the Senate, he had violated so many Roman laws that all they would, like, as soon as he wasn't consulate, they were going to string him up.
Yeah,
those were clear times where he had to recontrol the Senate. And that's what I mean. That's what I mean. So it was about expedience. It wasn't about what was right. It was just about, if I lose the Senate, I'm fucked. And the fact that he could put Mark Antony as consulate 1 year, or he could, get somebody who was going to do what he says as consulate, even though they didn't qualify by any definition, that's the same abuse.
They can say whatever the fuck they want to say. They can say whatever they want to say. And if they have enough followers, everybody's going to believe them. Period.
It's not about belief. It's about there's still whatever you're doing still has to have a sense of legitimacy, and so that's why you make guys off the street into senators, so that if it votes, you can at least say whatever. That's why you do a month of fights and feasting, because if you're fat and happy, then they don't care what you're doing behind the scenes,
So you're totally right. But what I'm saying is that when it comes to the point of legitimacy, and if we're doing it in parallel to modernism, damn well there does not have to be any legitimacy behind what you're saying. Something can happen. Somebody can get shot 5 seconds in front of me, and I can tell you that and everybody knows that it was wrong for that person to be shot. But I can look at it and get on camera right now, if I'm a person of power, and be like, yeah, that guy deserved to be shot. And they were like, you know what? That guy deserved to be shot. So it's not about legitimacy. It's about who wants to believe who. Period.
Guess I don't know.
War of ideals, basically.
I mean, that's what I mean. Like,
It's just ideals versus
all
ideals.
that's what I'm talking about. Like, we're losing the things that are important. Like, none of this. You know, the idea is that you knew what a citizen looked like. You knew what a senator looked like. That was something. And, you know, I'm not saying that it's always a good idea just to have a standard that lasts hundreds of years, because, like I said, the subsequent generation should strengthen that. They shouldn't just carry it along, because the natural course is to decay. Decay is always the natural course. So, you know, for us, I think if we stop talking about Rome for a sec, if we do recognize that things are decaying, then it's for us to preserve what we can and just make sure that there are good standards being kept
Yeah,
in our own lives, because we can't control what anyone else does.
yeah, it definitely seems like what we just rounded up to is we're at a state of decay that is so rapid that it's kind of hard to control, because the levels of division and ideals are so vast now. There's so many different ideals that are combating each other that it's kind of proving how America's kind of subject to fail soon.
Yeah. So who's going to be Byzantine? Who's going to be the Eastern?
You know what I'm saying? Who's going to be, right?
Where are we going to run to? Are we going to run to Minnesota? Are we going to
East or
run to
West?
Montana? Is that like
Jack Dorsey's going to become the president of California.
no, Jerry Brown's going to come out of retirement with his smiley face army, man. Like, he only stopped being senator, what, 2 years ago? I mean, governor. That dude was governor over decades. The 80s, 90s, and the 2000s again. Like, that dude, yeah. I don't know where it's going to be, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was fracturing. I wouldn't be surprised if there were different enclaves, a little balkanization for you. And I wouldn't be surprised if some places do better than others based off of how they conduct themselves, you know? Because, yeah, I look at some of the standards that are supposed to be mainstream standards, and I'm like, you can keep that. You know what I mean? You can keep that, and I'll do it my way. And it's not just us, it's just the West in general. We've got a global standard of living, I guess. So
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to look at.
yeah, man.
Not for nothing, I feel like we've gotten like stuck in this loop, like, and a lot of the times, like, there's an aspect where we like kind of did this to ourselves.
Of course we did. I mean, it's just the natural way that these things do. To grow, you got to bring more people in, but as you grow, you dilute the sauce. You know, there's more water than sauce at some point, and then it's just gonna boil over.
It's not the failure of integration into society isn't on the part of the people that need to be integrated in this case. You know what I mean?
Who's blaming anybody? If you're trying to build an empire, then the empire is your problem.
Failure.
Yeah,
That's what is the fucking policy failure, and the policy failure isn't on the part. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't the Goths that fucking, you know, didn't hold up their end of the deal. You know what I mean? Like, they were important to Roman society at that point. They had first had contact in the 3rd century. Well, I'm talking about the 5th century. They'd already been around for 200 years. You know what I mean?
And nobody's blaming anybody, but the mechanism of empire is to blame. In order to grow, you bring in more people. But that is also the same way that you start destroying yourself. Because you can't be closed off. It's the constant expansion that kills you. the fact
the-
that the Romans needed the Goths instead of creating their own armies like they did for centuries before then is a failure of the Romans.
That's
So,
what I was trying
Yeah.
to say.
So yeah, their weakness was a weakness of the structure of empire. Every empire goes through it. There's no empire that's like, oh, we're gonna scale down for a few years and just chill out, and then no, you have to keep murdering and slashing and growing. Like even for Alexander the Great, he abolished taxation right before he became king, because that's what his father promised. And the only way that they could create revenue for the government was by conquering other lands. And that's not easy because it takes money to go create more money at that point, and you're in a vicious circle where you're always asking for money to go get more, and he's always at war, which means he can't do other things. And what does he do? He dies in India. Like that is the catch 22, and it's just these. Once you're in it, you got to just keep the pistons pumping, and you don't see when it overheats, and you slip. Just
Well, no, but there is a maximum headroom in terms of expansion of an empire where it's possible to maintain it, right? Because there was a time in the Roman Empire where like the borders of Trajan were pretty much set for a good long while, and they stopped expanding. And then what it basically became was the inflation and the destruction of the middle class.
Yeah,
And
because the internal economy couldn't sustain itself. So much of the Roman economy was from taking spoils from other established kingdoms and bringing them back home.
right.
Trade. It wasn't just the stuff they produced at home. A big chunk of it was like, oh, these guys have been producing for hundreds of years. Let's cop that shit. You know what I mean?
Well, they
Like-
were like American society. They were essentially a syncretic society. Like most of the, like, if you think about what's uniquely American, right? Like a lot of it comes from other countries, right? And the same was true for Rome, right? Like, they're basically their only real claim to fame in history that's like uniquely theirs is the military advancements and the basically
Roads.
they invented the military
The
core of
fucking
engineering.
roads.
Yeah, the road, the roads in the post office, dude.
Roads,
You're-
post offices, water, running water, and all that.
Well, just an interconnected network, right? Like every military.
I mean-
the thing with the Roman military is that they could build a base.
Yeah, the
You know-
ability to get from one city to the next that quickly was uniquely Roman, and like,
Well, the other thing is that you could travel Roman roads and you weren't gonna get fucking murdered. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, the stability of it.
yeah. Anyway, if we want to switch topics, like, I don't want to stay on this all night. We can switch to some of the other topics. I think Eric, you had the some of the lighter stuff or whatever.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, we could talk about whatever. I mean, shit. I mean, I will tell you guys, based off of what you guys were just talking about, outsourcing jobs, right?
Yeah, they outsourced the military. So it's like the Romans did what like we started doing under Bush. You know what I mean? Which is to outsource large chunks of the military, and that never bodes well for
Which Bush are you talking about?
the second one.
I'm talking about the first one. Because if
Well,
we
he
would,
did a lot of shit, but he didn't outsource the military. So
okay, he didn't outsource the military, but he also taught people to be how to be a part of our military. He's planted the
Well,
seeds.
yeah. Yeah, fucking Bush one was destabilizing a lot of Latin American governments back in the 80s. He was the head of the CIA. I mean,
So I mean, like as far as like outsourcing jobs go, I think a lot of like our platform, as far as like America goes, has to do with, I mean, we steal ideas from people all the time. I mean, look at space exploration. Like we didn't invent this shit. Elon Musk didn't come up with all of this shit. These are ideas that we stole from other people, just to use as an example. And like, unfortunately, just like fucking, what the fuck is his name? Mark Zuckerberg, we perfected it. Like,
But isn't Elon Musk just a
quote
civilian
unquote, but
corporation?
yeah.
I mean, NASA's
I
only
mean, Musk is
recently
an
getting
American,
involved.
so it's not
American
a
and a
fact.
South American and a South African. South
You don't-
African.
Yeah,
South
he
African.
came to this country. What we offer people is a platform to use your ideas as best you can, and some people we just don't offer it to. We just do it. But you know, the back end of it is you're supposed to be able to do a menial, shitty job and live a decent life. Now, if you're an immigrant, you come from somewhere where it's much shittier, then you know a lot of it just looks better, like it's fine to you. But if you've been around for a while and you see the potential of it, a lot of people get, you know, you get bitter that you're not the Kardashians and you're not fucking living in a mansion, and you know, because there's this idea that poverty equals crime, and like I've been in countries that are much poorer than America and they have less crime in some places, and it's not always the case. I think it's more about when you start looking at what everyone else has and you're wondering why you can't have that too, and you don't see a pathway to it. So if we don't give people options, then they'll do what they gotta do. Just like our boy with the pointy hat started fucking people up, kidnapping princesses, you know, taking them from castle to castle.
That's a double-edged sword, because people also do get inspired by that and work harder. Like, oh shit, you guys. Hold on.
That might be
Okay.
just as well. I got an early start tomorrow.
Um,
We going anywhere?
no, we've got about, I forgot my charger. We got about 15 minutes left. But yeah. I mean, shit. We might have to come back to this next week too, because like I don't feel like I'm done with this topic. I mean, I just feel like there are so many parallels right now, especially right now, with Joe's topic.
Anybody there?
I think we're all here, but I think it's
Honestly, I
wrapping
thought you were
up.
just gonna say. I thought you were gonna say something. That's all.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to go get a glass of tea, and so I missed the
Oh.
last like.
You had a spot of tea. Yeah, that's another empire.
A spot
to
of
talk
tea.
about.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna wrap it up for me. I gotta wake up at fucking 5 tomorrow. It's fucking stupid.
It's all right. We exhausted ourselves going real deep tonight.
Yeah, man, that was kind of cool. I like the presentation.
Yeah,
Oh,
we'll
yeah.
go real deep next time. I mean, what?
This isn't prison, booty warrior. But
I like
Oh,
you. I want you.
motherfucker.
Got to have you.
you know he's
Oh,
been
you
out
talk-
since 2015.
John, you're talking about choice is yours, aren't you?
Yeah, he's been out since 2015. I hope
Look,
he's
we
back
can do
in.
this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. The choice is yours.
Choice is
hope-
yours.
I hope he is back in there and they just put him under the jail. You know,
Oh, he fucking real good now.
The
don't-
booty train.
booty warrior. I don't want anything to do with a man like that's stuff I'm really afraid. Everyone's like afraid of stupid shit. Like I'm afraid of meeting a guy like that.
Oh,
And you
totally.
You can't
John.
reason with him. You can't make him
John.
laugh. You can't do anything that's gonna change his mind. He's decided that your ass is his ass, and
I met a guy like that once.
Oh, did you?
no, Joe.
No.
And you got out alive.
I did get out alive. I don't know how, but basically, I was working at this bar in Omaha, and it was fucking like 1:30 in the afternoon. There was no one in the bar, and this fucking. I'm talking about when people talk about a brick shit house. This guy was a cinder block. He
Yeah.
had no fucking neck. He was just pure fucking cinder block shit house muscle, shaped like a fucking triangle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he's the only guy in the bar. So the dude comes in the kitchen where I'm working, and he's like, look, I got to go change the keg. But the girl behind there is afraid of this dude because he just got out of jail on a fucking attempted murder. Can you fucking watch the bar while I go take the keg and like make sure this guy doesn't fucking eat this girl alive? And I'm like, okay, because of course this guy gets out of jail off of a attempted murder. He gets out on that shit, and the first thing he does is come to the bar. And this dude's fucked up, retarded, dumb, like barely coherent, don't even have all his teeth. You know what I mean? Kind of methy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm standing behind the bar, and he's just cackling, laughing. He's like, "Are you supposed to watch me?" And I'm like, "Dude, this guy could eat me for fucking breakfast. Like, I am not a blanket of protection for this girl. I'm just a fucking wet blanket that will be tossed in the way of his fucking murderous rampage." Here's the other thing. I get off of work at like 4:00. The sun's like going down or whatever because it's fall. And I run into this guy on the street, and he's fucked up, and he asked me for a cigarette. I was like about to give him the whole pack. I was like, bruh, whatever you want, dog, but I'm not fucking with you. You know what I mean?
Jesus Christ. Yeah.
He was happy drunk, but yeah, if he had wanted to, he could have booty warriored my ass. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, too.
You just never know.
He just wasn't good, and he got a cigarette, and he didn't fuck with me. But if he wanted to, that dude could have booty warriored me easily. You know what I mean? So yeah, dude. Sometimes you do be running into some saltiness, you know.
Ugh. All right, now I'm gonna go have nightmares. Thanks, guys.
Sorry about that,
Fuck.
John.
All right.
Have a good night, everybody. Yeah.
Fuck you, Joe.
Hey, Joe, it's been real. That was actually it. Like,
Gonna dream about the collapse in my collapsing sphincter.
I'm gonna be honest. I don't think that we're done here. I think that there's this,
Just
honestly, I don't think that this is I don't
death
think,
of my asshole.
yikes.
The decline and fall of your asshole.
The rise and fall of John Kwamya's butt.
Been there, done that. Anyway,
The rise and fall of the pink sock. Ugh. Ugh. Ugh.
What was that, Eric?
Oh, I said been there, done that. Anyway, look, it's been real, y'all. I really feel like this is gonna be a 2-part episode. I think that we should go over the parallels next episode. Like, we just started. I feel like we're only like cracking the surface. So,
Well, what we could do as a follow-up is next time when Bennett's on here, we can talk about like what those standards were that got lost that John was talking about, and talk a little bit about like the Roman Republic, and then get into the parallels between, obviously all of the fucking founders of America like look to the Roman Republic as an ideal. So, there's that. But also we can talk more about like, booty warriors and stuff.
We should go out on just one CIS. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yes, John. I was about to suggest that. Eric, if you could pull up your screen share and type in what is it? What's the guy's name? Michael Caruso.
Caruso.
Yeah, the Caruso one-liners. He always puts his sunglasses on before he
God.
says the second part of the one-liner. But come on, John, because we can do the formula
How
too.
do you
Just
spell
like
his name? How do you spell his last name?
CAR.
SO. Caruso. Well, yeah, it's fucking phonetic as shit. But yeah, CSI. Just type in CSI David Caruso one-liners into YouTube.
I'll let you guys say Michael Caruso. Sorry.
Yeah, but John, the formula is so easy. It's like you take a statement, right, and then you try to be clever with it. So it's like
Oh, you guys are talking about Horatio. Oh, I used to watch this on the show.